Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe they can do what they want, when they want, because nobody else matters. And in today's episode, we've got Karens trying to steal medical devices, throwing tantrums, horribly entitled bosses, and one OP wonders if she's the bad guy for single-handedly ruining Christmas this year. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so for those that don't know, a rollator is basically a walker on wheels. I had a stroke 6 years ago and my balance and vision got messed up. I can walk maybe 20 to 25 feet on a flat surface without help, but I'll need my rollator to take long walks and I take it with me whenever I go somewhere. I normally have weekly groceries delivered to me at my apartment, but every month or 6 weeks or so, depending on schedules, my mom will take me to a specialty grocery store where I can get a lot of pre-packaged meals that I just have to pop in the microwave. We were on one of those trips and we were waiting in line to check out. The rollator that insurance covered was a piece of cheap white plastic. So last year, my mom bought me one that's black steel and titanium composition. It's also got a pouch on the back for storing things, and when I need a break, I can lock the wheels and it has a fold-out bench I can sit on. So while my groceries were being checked out, I fold out the bench, sat down, and waited. When we were done, I got up, unlocked the wheels, while my mom rolls out my cart of groceries. Now, I had barely gotten 5 feet when a lady walks up and she aggressively grabs my rollator, saying, "I'll take this now." Obviously, I said no, and I jerked it away from her and proceeded to follow my mom to the parking lot. Well, this lady follows us to the car and she was waiting there tapping her foot while we loaded the groceries. Now, I didn't trust her, so I stood there holding the rollator. My mom told me, "Go ahead, get in, it's unlocked." And that's when I shook my head no and tried to subtly point at the lady as to why I wasn't getting in. My mom understood and she finished loading the groceries. When my mom was done, she folds down the rollator and she puts it on top of the bags in the car. And when she was closing the door, that's when the lady starts shrieking how we were stealing store property and to give it to her right now. I don't know if someone got him or what, but that's when a manager type comes out and he asked what's going on. And this is when the lady screamed how we were stealing the store rollator and she needs to use it. The manager then asked my mom about it and she said it was mine. My mom even showed him the plaques bolted on that had my name and emergency contacts. The manager then told the woman that it wasn't store property and that she should leave and go on with her business. But the lady wasn't having it though. She kept screaming that she needed it now that we were done, while the manager kept telling her that it was mine and if she needed help, they could find her a mobility scooter or something. Well, the woman didn't like this and she suddenly went from shrieking to sweet old lady, saying, well, maybe they could leave it here for me to use and I could bring it back when I'm done, and they can come back to get it. The manager asked my mom, would that be okay with you? And my mom, knowing we would never see it again, said no, we had other places to go where we would need it. At that, the lady began screaming again while we just drove off. I don't know how it ended for the manager, but I hope he survived it. I'm sure the manager's fine, but honestly, that guy let it go on for way longer than it should have been, right? Especially with asking OP if it was okay for Karen to take the rollator. Like, what are you smoking, sir? Like, there is absolutely no world where a person would just hand over their medical device to an a-hole Karen who's being mean and just wants it. And this person, I think, says it the best. They comment, I think people need to start carrying around rolled up newspapers everywhere. If someone tries to pull this, you smack them on the nose and tell them, no, bad human. Wouldn't that be awesome? So, a few years ago, I needed a course of chemotherapy, and I was warned to expect all the usual side effects: nausea, fatigue, aches and pains, and of course, hair loss. Well, after the first couple of rounds, I was feeling fairly good, not too nauseous. My gums had begun to hurt though, and I was starting to notice that my hair was beginning to get, shall we say, a bit loose. I had noticed a bit more on my comb, and a little bit more in the shower drain than usual. Now, I'd usually put this down to regular, old male pattern baldness paranoia, but I reckon the drugs were beginning to take effect. Well, a couple of rounds further on, I really knew it. I felt old and creaky, I had mouth ulcers, and my appetite vanished. However, my hair was still in place, but I could feel it was losing the battle to cling on, even so. So with that said, on with the story. I worked in a small office, and my boss Carla, fake name, was a woman in her 40s who, shall we say, was kind of self-entitled. She would talk incessantly about herself, and the theme was always the same: how hard her life was and the many insufferable situations she had to deal with. And being forced to listen to a lot of these problems, we all came to the conclusion that most of these insufferable situations were A, basically just run-of-the-mill problems that everyone has to deal with, and B, largely self-inflicted. And when it came to work, no matter what the issue was or how it needed to be fixed, it always came back to her and how the situation made her feel. Like any given meeting was at least 40% discussing how this issue affected her personally, when all we wanted to do was just get the job done. It did get pretty annoying from time to time, but apart from the occasional inward sigh at her behavior, I powered through, until I told her about my upcoming chemo. At first, she seemed cool with everything. I would take 3 days off every couple of weeks to stay on a ward for the treatment, and I would be back in the office the remaining time. No problem. Good stuff. I had also told a couple of other people in the office too, but I didn't talk about it much as I didn't really want to be labeled as the cancer guy. And also, as the subject's a bit of a downer, I didn't want to bum people out needlessly. Everybody's got something going on in their lives, right? But this is when Carla's attitude began to change. I began to notice odd passive-aggressive comments that she would make, mentioning my treatment or me having to visit the doctor. Not much at first, but they began to grow in frequency. And then, a few days after, my boss's friend comes over to have a quiet conversation with me. My boss's friend said to me, "Well, she's finding it very hard to come to terms with your news." She then said it's really affecting her deeply. Just give her some time. I was pretty annoyed at this, but then I asked the friend whether my situation was bringing up stuff from the past, or maybe a family member was ill too. But she just replied, no, it's nothing like that. She's a really sensitive person. And this is when I told the friend that my boss really doesn't need to come to terms with anything, because it was me having the treatment, not her, and that she shouldn't even worry about it. And then I went off for a long therapeutic crap to calm down. Well, over the next week, my boss's behavior got more passive-aggressive towards me, and slowly a thought began to percolate through my mind. Surely she's not jealous, right? Surely she can't think that I'm pulling focus away from her. Surely she's not upset because she's not able to trump chemotherapy, because that would be insanely shallow, right? But the more her behavior went on and the more I thought about it, well, once you eliminate the impossible, as Sherlock Holmes says, it becomes possible, right? So things finally came to a head about 2 weeks later. I was at my desk, feeling fairly rough by this point. I had finished a round of chemo 2 days earlier, and my skin was looking pretty gray. My teeth felt wobbly, but my hair was still there. But it felt like it was just resting on the top of my head, rather than anchored there. That's when a colleague noticed I looked under the weather, and kindly asked me if I was okay. And I replied, "I'll be alright, thanks. But I reckon I won't have much hair this time next week." Well, my boss just happened to pass by at the moment, and I could see her face screw up as I said it. My boss then chipped in and said, "Oh, come on, I don't think the chemotherapy is as bad as you make it seem, is it?" Now, had this come from a friend, I probably would have let it go. And with my close friends, I had made some pretty similar and extremely dark jokes myself, and so had they. But this is what you do with close friends, right? But I was not close with my boss. Something had collapsed in the center of me when she said it, and before I knew what I was doing, I stood up, went over to her, blocked the exit before she could leave the room, and I said to her, "I'm not sure, Carla. I'm not sure if chemotherapy is as bad as I make it seem. Why don't we find out?" As I said that, I reached to the back of my head, and I casually yanked out a giant fistful of hair. Now, my hair at the time was fairly short, but it was pretty curly. So I had a good old amount in my hand, about the size of an enormous orange. The back of my head suddenly had a huge bald patch. I held the mass of hair up in the air for a second, and then looked at my boss again and said, "What do you think, Carla? Let me know." I said that calmly as I plonked it down in her quivering hand, and then turned and left the office. Carla just looked at the hair in her hand as if it was a grenade. Now, not even a long therapeutic crap was gonna sort this one out, so I went to take an early lunch. When I got back to the office, the HR rep was waiting near my desk. I just smiled, sat down, and she came over, and there was a pregnant pause. She then takes a deep breath and said, "So, a couple of your colleagues let me know what happened with Carla earlier." I just replied, "I see." She then goes on and says, "Bearing in mind what just happened, we'd like to offer you paid leave for the remainder of your treatment. Would that be okay with you?" Now, bearing in mind that I had at least 3 more cycles of treatment, lasting 6 more weeks, my answer was a carefully considered, "Yes, I do believe that would be alright with me, Miss HR lady." Me and my bald patch then walked out of the office 10 minutes later and went home. My girlfriend and I called our friends over that evening for some beers and curry, and we all got drunk and shaved my head. Even though I looked weird, I was pleasantly surprised to find that my head didn't have too many weird bumps on it. It was a good evening, especially when I decided it would be hilarious to tell my male friends how grateful I was that they all agreed to shave their heads too in solidarity. Anyway, to cut to the chase, the rest of the treatment went well. Everything went into remission and has thankfully stayed in remission ever since, so job done. I took the time off, got through the treatment, and also managed to find myself a new job at the same time, before I had to return. Meanwhile, back at the office, Carla's star was on the wane. Word had gotten around about her behavior, and she tried her usual tricks. She said how she'd been misunderstood and how upset she was about the whole thing, playing the woe is me card. But people were noticeably colder towards her, and according to my colleagues, people had started to refer to her as Hairball behind her back, and the name stuck. I finally returned to work, only to hand my notice in and leave. On my way out, I tried to be as classy as possible with Carla. I thanked her for the opportunity and wished her well for the future. I also gave her a card and a small token of my appreciation. I told her to not bother unwrapping it until she got home. It was a DVD of a popular 1979 anti-war musical directed by Milos Forman, starring John Savage and Treat Williams. She didn't say anything at all. My hair grew back, and the new job was pretty terrific. Some frickin' people, I tell you. Who cares about you? It's all about me, me, me. And the fact that the boss still tried to play that card after what happened is mind-boggling. And for all of you who are wondering about the gift that OP gave their boss, I did the Googling so you don't have to. It was a frickin' musical titled Hair. Absolute chef's kiss, right? So I'm at Chick-fil-A the other day, and at this location, they have 2 drive-thru lanes, one for regular orders and one for mobile orders. I always use the mobile lane because it's way faster. Well, not today. Today, enter Karen, the entitled woman. The woman cuts me off in the parking lot, which is red flag number 1, but whatever. There is also no one else in the mobile lane, so it's not a huge deal. So I pull up behind her, and I immediately notice that she's not holding a phone to scan the QR code like a normal person. No, the woman's sitting there waving at the attendants. And here's a news flash: nobody monitors the mobile lane. So naturally, she starts laying on the horn like a lunatic. And that's when an employee finally comes over. Before he's even at her car, she starts barking out her order. And this isn't a short order. This woman orders like she's feeding an army. After ordering, the woman drives off without paying. The guy literally has to chase her down to get her payment. She then pulls up to the window where I'm stuck right behind her, despite having scanned my code and being ready to grab my food in seconds. This is when the employee at the window asked her to pull around to one of the waiting spots, and the woman refuses, saying, "No, it always takes longer if I pull around. I'm waiting right here." The employee explains very patiently that pulling around will not delay her order, but it will let them serve the people behind her whose food is ready. And this is when the woman responds, "It's not really fair to prepare their orders before mine. I was here first." The employee tries to explain how food stations work, but she interrupts saying, "They should all be working on the first person's order. I know you make minimum wage, but this really shouldn't be that hard to understand." So after what feels like forever, the manager appears at the window. The guy leans out, and he very politely asked her to pull around, even promising to personally bring her food as soon as it's ready. To top it all off, he offers her a complimentary peppermint shake as an apology for the inconvenience. And what does Karen do? Well, Karen knocks the shake out of his hand and it goes flying everywhere. It goes on him, inside the window, total chaos. She even has the nerve to beep her horn at him. And finally, karma starts to take hold. A couple of minutes later, 2 police officers walk around to the front of the drive-thru, coming towards her. Karen laughs at the manager saying, "You really called the police?" To which the manager calmly responds, "No ma'am, they were at the counter when I walked by, covered in the milkshake you knocked all over me. They also heard your shouting and honking. I told them it was fine, but they wanted to check in on the situation." At this point, the officers reached her car and told her if she doesn't pull forward and talk to them, they'll arrest her for assault and move the car themselves. The woman finally pulls around, but she doesn't stop. She speeds out of the parking lot. The police just laughed. The woman has a very easy to remember vanity plate, and they told the manager that they're adding obstruction of justice for failing to comply with a lawful order when they track her down. Now I know not all posts here have happy endings, so I figured I'd share this one for the holiday season. Frickin' karmic justice, right? And seriously, when will people learn to never talk down or mistreat others, especially those handling your food? Like, do you really want to crap on someone's job when they're in charge of your food, Karen? That's never a wise thing to do. But yeah, people are not smart, clearly. And it was super obvious when Karen literally ran away from the police, thinking she escaped. I'm just waiting for that shocked Pikachu face when she finds out after effing around. So this happened a few years back. I've encountered a few self-entitled people in the past, but this one sales guy takes the cake. At the time, I was widowed for about 2 years. I missed my late hubby a lot, so I kept his urn of ashes on my bedside table, as I was in the habit of talking to him about my day and saying goodnight at bedtime. One day, the doorbell rang, and being the socially anxious gal I am, I ignored it. Well, the person rang the bell 3 more times, and I became more annoyed than anxious, so I answered the door. To my great displeasure, there was a man at my door who wanted to talk about the state of my gutters and how desperately they needed to be cleaned. How convenient was it that this man was willing to do the vile job of cleaning my gutters for $250? Of course, I tried to politely decline, but the guy kept up with his pre-programmed speech and asserted that I didn't know what I was talking about and how he needs to speak to the man of the house. The guy said this a couple of times, and this is when I had enough. So I leaned back in the house and I called my husband's name. I shouted, "Mark, there's a guy at the door and he wants to talk about cleaning our gutters." Obviously, my spouse did not respond, so I shouted louder for my spouse, but again, he didn't hear me or come to the door. And this is when the sales guy gets annoyed and he tells me, "Just go get him." Apologizing to the man, I told him that I would just run upstairs and get the man of the house. As promised, I did run upstairs and grab Mark. I returned to the front door, lamenting out loud to Mark how frustrating it is when he doesn't respond to me calling for him, and I absolutely hate it when he gives me the silent treatment. I then exclaim, holding the urn up like a game show prize, "Here's the man of the house." I continued talking to the salesman, telling him that although Mark is a great listener, I'm saddened by how uninvolved he is with our kids. I told him he's the strong, silent type, while the salesman just stood there bug-eyed. I decided to increase my dedication to the bit as well, and allowed my tears to flow unfettered. Now, normally I loathe crying in front of strangers, but the grief of losing the father of my kids, mixed with a rage at the arrogance and dismissive sexism, led to me sob-screaming how much I hated my current life. There were tears and so much ugly crying, snot-sobbing noises coming out of me that I didn't even realize he had made a mad dash to get away from this hysterical woman and back to his truck. It was cathartic for me to release those pent-up emotions, and sometimes I still laugh about it with Mark. I know he would definitely be howling with laughter, as he was always quite a jokester. Oh my goodness, Opie handled that absolutely brilliantly. Like, what was the look on that guy's face when Opie came down with her husband's urn in her hand and he realized he messed up big time? And not even an apology from that guy. With that said, I'm sure that guy will remember that experience forever and think twice about using that line again. And my goodness, if you guys think that sales guy was traumatized, listen to this next one, where Karen gets destroyed. So I was working at a company that, despite being multinational, had a very small staff due to its nature. This, plus the constant staff absences from the office due to site and field trips, meant that everyone at all degrees of seniority came and went from the head office and mucked in and did whatever needed doing whenever they were there. Eventually, however, it came to the point of needing a dedicated office person for answering the phone, data entry, filing, etc., so the specialist could focus more on the medical work. And this is when a girl was hired. I was away consulting on a site setup when she started, and this happened when I came back and met her. So I got back in the morning and wasn't planning on working immediately after such a long trip. Instead, I was planning on picking up my 5-year-old nephew from school and going to the park with him. We were going to drop off some papers and a case full of medical equipment at the office along the way. So I arrived to the office wearing jeans with a child in tow. I see that the new girl was hired, so I immediately try to introduce myself. I walk up to her and say, "Hi, you must be the new girl." And before I can even introduce myself, she says, "What do you want?" I tell her I'm just dropping off the equipment case and some paperwork. The girl doesn't bother to reply, she just shrugs towards the back where the case goes. I put the papers on the edge of the desk in order to wrangle the case into its cupboard, and she screams at me saying, "Don't put them there, they don't belong there, what are you doing?" I ask, "Where would you like them?" She says, "Where would I like them? They're nothing to do with me, just get them out of my way." At this point, I take a deep breath, and remember, she has no way of knowing who I am, or my role with that company. So I say to her, "Actually, these need to be entered in the computer, so should I hand them to you, or do you have a tray?" This is when she says, "Well, how about you do your work and stop trying to pass it on to me? And that child should not be here." And I want to note, my nephew, who's been in the office many times, looks startled at this and a bit upset. I just tell her, "I understand you're taking over in the office. Well, She cuts me off again, and she says, "That's right, and as the manager, I need to tell you that in the future, you need to dress appropriately and do the work you're given. This is unacceptable." At this point, I take another deep breath. I try to muster sympathy as she's new, and she probably hasn't realized the jeans and the child aren't out of line for a quick drop-off. I summon a smile for a final attempt at making this encounter pleasant. I say to her, I never finished introducing myself. If you'd let me talk, And this is when she says to my nephew, "Don't you touch anything. Just because your mom, me, lets you get away with coming in here doesn't mean I will put up with it." My nephew's confused and distraught at this attack, and he bursts into tears. Me, suddenly not giving a damn if she's new, I lost all sympathy and my smile. And I say to her, No, I don't think so." She then screams at me and says, "If you don't like it, then you can take it up with the CEO. I'm a personal friend as well as the manager here, and he's happy for me to run the place as I see fit." Hearing that, I'm thinking, "Take it up with the CEO," she says. I know he'll be in shortly, so I decide to wait and do just that. Soon, he comes in the door, and that's when my nephew screams, "Daddy." He then runs over and gets hugs. And this is when the CEO says to me, "Oh great, you're back. Have you met the office girl yet?" He then looks over at office girl and says, "This is Dr. So-and-so, my business partner, and she's my sister." And you should have seen the look on her face. He takes the papers off me and hands them to her. He then takes a closer look at his son, and then he says, "What's wrong, kiddo? Are you crying?" So yeah, we did not fire her, she just didn't show up the next day. I don't know what happened to her after that, she never contacted us for a reference. Well, that's a great way to end your career, right? Scream at the owner and the CEO's son, I can feel the embarrassment for this woman. Karen did it right by not showing up the next day. How do you even come back from that situation? But yeah, that is such a Karen thing to do though, right? I'm the only one working in this office, so I shall appoint myself to the position of office manager. So I'm not sure if I'm proud of what I did, but I was pushed over the edge a few weeks ago. To start, I'm a 30-year-old female, and I met my boyfriend, who's also 30, 3 years ago. Before me, he was together with his high school sweetheart. They fell out of love and broke up. Over half a year ago, we start dating. His mom, however, was still heartbroken about it, and she wouldn't let it go. I was very understanding, and I thought she needed time to get to know me. The ex, who we'll call Sarah, not her real name, basically grew up with them, and they saw her as a part of the family. For the first few months of the relationship, his mom would call me Sarah all the time, never once addressed me by my real name, until my boyfriend got angry once and told her to be nice. She just laughed it off, and she said it was a habit. After that, she starts calling me Jessica, which is also the wrong name. Now, I did correct her a couple of times, but she seemed to like hurting me, so I just ignored it. My boyfriend also has 2 sisters, and a couple of weeks before Christmas this year, we were invited to a barbecue at the older sister's house. I was in the kitchen with my boyfriend's mom, the sisters, and one of their husbands. The older sister then talked about how my boyfriend praised my cooking to her husband, and the mom was listening. She then said out loud, "Oh, if her cooking is so good, why don't we let Janet, not my name, make the roast this year for Christmas dinner?" The sisters giggled and they looked at each other, and that's when I said, "That's a great idea." I didn't tell my boyfriend what happened. Well, come Christmas Eve, we went to his mom's house with the usual wine and dessert. When we walked in the door, she was shocked. Everyone was shocked. Mom then said, "Is that all? You were supposed to bring the roast." To which I said, "What? I thought somebody named Janet was bringing it." Long story short, there was a lot of yelling, crying, and then we got kicked out. I ruined dinner, apparently. My boyfriend was so angry with me that I didn't tell him, and he hasn't really spoken to me since Christmas. And his mom is convinced that I'm the a-hole, and I pulled the biggest a-hole move. So am I the a-hole? Oh man, way to drive the point home, and I support OP 100%. Like, if anyone's the a-hole in this, it's the mom for sure, and OP's boyfriend for not defending her. Like, holy lady, you know what your son's girlfriend's name is, so why the heck are you pulling that crap? And honestly, for OP to put up with it for so long, this was fully deserved. I just hope OP let everyone know that mom said out loud that someone named Janet was supposed to bring the roast this year. Absolutely hilarious though. Guys, let me know your thoughts. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I know it's been a while, it's in our / malicious compliance, where bad bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.